There are some teams I talk about more than others, and it's because one of two things. One might be that they have a lot more fantasy relevant players. That makes them more interesting. The stakes are higher to understand how those players might perform. And then if you have a good read on a certain team, then the ripple effect for five, six, seven fantasy relevant players is that you come in smarter for your draft. The other side of it is when I feel like some players are dramatically overvalued or undervalued. I've talked about the Chargers at least a couple times on this podcast this summer, and I'm going to talk about them a third time from a different angle, and that's Ladd McConkey. We're on the eve almost of the start of week one, and I've been sitting here awestruck at McConkey's stable ADP. He's not going anywhere. No one is knocking him off that pedestal. He's the WR11. He's been right around 11, maybe 10, 12 in that range for, I think, pretty much 45 plus days. Even though Mike Williams retired, even though they added Keenan Allen. Today, Keenan Allen's ADP is 53. Quentin Johnston is kind of off the map, somewhere around 70. And Trey Harris is, I think, mid 60s, late 60s. So the ADPs collectively of Keenan Allen and Trey Harris and Quentin Johnston have somewhat stayed still or declined, and Ladd McConkey has stayed put at 11. It's a huge disparity, which I have referenced before. I want to talk today about why the disparity makes no sense. McConkey, just to get the stats all out of the way, he was the WR15 last year. He was the WR19 in points per game. And as I've shared many times, including a few days ago on this podcast, it is very common for ascending talents to have slightly better ADPs than where they finished the year before in terms of production. So it stands to reason, yes, McConkey, ADP of 11, even though he finished as the WR15 overall last year, the WR19 in points per game. Now, last year, the context should be made very clear, which is you look around at who they had on that team besides McConkey, especially in the receiving core. That's what I'm talking about. It was Quentin Johnston, who right now has gone from the number 2 wide receiver to the number 4, essentially. Joshua Palmer, who's always serviceable, but never really commanded the attention that a number 1 or number 2 would need to command. And probably for good reason. He's probably better off as a secondary, tertiary option in offenses. Will Dissly was number 2 in receptions on the team. He's a perennial. When he was on the Seahawks, he was like one of 3 tight ends who would mix in with like Noah Fant and I forgot who the third was, but Will Dissly is kind of a serviceable tight end in the NFL, not as serviceable in fantasy, but here he is catching the second most balls on the team. Also notably, Quentin Johnston missed a couple games, and guess what? McConkey in one of those games had like 29 fantasy points, which was the most he had. J.K. Dobbins missed 3 games, and those 3 games, Dobbins was the number 1 running back. Gus Edwards was a rapidly declining running back, so good early in his career. Not as great after his serious injury something like 3 years ago. But he averaged like 3.5 yards a carry. It was basically Dobbins was the guy driving the running game. When he got hurt in those 3 games, guess what happened? McConkey's average fantasy points ticked up about 2.5 points above where he was throughout the rest of the season. He had the most targets, I think, in that first game without Dobbins that he had all season by far. Those are not coincidences. Now, there's a lot of teams out there with players where similar things happen. Somebody gets hurt, somebody else steps up, and boom, they're the WR7 or, they're the WR26. And maybe they would have been much lower than that if not for an injury. Totally get that. What I'm saying is we need to understand that the current Chargers roster, with the exception of maybe Keenan Allen because of his age, is not materially higher risk for injuries than any other roster. And so it's not as if it's Ladd McConkey and a bunch of injury-prone receivers, and well, it's going to happen again. It's going to be the McConkey show because no one else is going to stay healthy. No, it's Keenan Allen, rookie Trey Harris, Quentin Johnston, arguably as good or better backfield, and still the same Ladd McConkey. Granted, very talented McConkey, but is he a WR11 talent? I say absolutely not. When you've got someone like McConkey, where a perfect storm allowed him to be the WR15, the perfect storm being there was no other wide receiver who could do what he could do, and it wasn't even close on the field. And the fact again that the journeyman tight end is second on the team in catches should tell us a lot about what 2025 will do versus 2024. That in 2025, we have an influx of two potentially impact wide receivers, one on the tail end of his career, one at the start of his career. Where would I put McConkey? Subscribers know for a while he's been lower on my rankings. I think he's around 18, 19 among wide receivers. I am struck by the fact that he is ahead of Tyreek Hill. He's ahead of Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's ahead of Garrett Wilson. He's ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. All four of those guys I would put ahead of McConkey. The last thing I'll say is that, yes, Justin Herbert is a terrific quarterback who's had a bad shake the last 2 or so years because the receivers that came in with him or were there already, it's changed a lot. He doesn't have Keenan Allen in his prime, Mike Williams in his prime, Austin Eckler in his prime. So this is also kind of a new offense in a large sense, even though Keenan Allen's back. And you could argue that McConkey is the one constant. And so it is quite possible that in week 1, week 2, McConkey could be the dominant guy. McConkey could be the alpha. And I want to caution you not to email me and say, see, you were wrong. He's definitely WR11. Because as the season goes on, the assumption will be that Harris will acclimate to the offense and get going, and that the backfield with Murray Hampton and maybe Najee Harris will get stronger, and that the team will be more balanced offensive attack rather than what we saw last year, where we had Dobbins doing what he could do in the backfield and McConkey doing what he could do as a receiver, and not much else consistent. When you see something like that, and then you see a personnel change that improves the team, and then you see that alpha receiver is suddenly ranked higher than he was even as a producer last year, something's off. This is BJ Riddell, Fantasy Football for Winners. Follow me on the blog, email me anytime. Sign up for the rankings before the season starts. If you need them, see you tomorrow.